Brexit talks have taken a break, exhaustion perhaps, or a lack of common ground. Either way, Michel Barnier is saying there are still sticking points. It's an argument over the level playing field. And the fish apparently are not pro-Brexit. Actually, they don't want to be caught by anyone. So could Britain be heading for a hard Brexit? Just how complicated are free trade agreements at the best of times? And with COVID running rampant and supply chains already disrupted, wouldn't you be completely balmy, absolutely bonkers, to be pushing ahead with a December the 31st deadline to leave? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Yes, those talks are not going very well at all. But today, we'll look at how hard it is to try and come up with a free trade agreement anyway, not just between Britain and Europe, but between any countries, because they are anything but free. And this one is going to be more complicated than most. And given that the talks are not going well, will they just throw in the towel and see what it's like to live without one? Well, we'll see, won't we? Fairly soon, I suspect. Now, Steve and I have been at odds over Brexit. He thinks it's needed and hopes that it will destroy the EU. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. I've always thought that despite the inadequacies of the EU, it's best to have a seat at the table at what is one of the world's, if not the world's, greatest trading bloc, particularly at times like this. But Steve, I do get the point that it is, particularly as far as the Eurozone is concerned, that it's a bit of a half-pregnant cow, isn't it, in that they get to control the interest rates within a centralised economy through the ECB. But then they impose restrictions on what sovereign countries can or cannot do with their own governmental budgets. I mean, I think that's pretty much the basis of your objection to it all, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. And this is, I mean, the reason I voted for Brexit had nothing to do with whether it was going to be good or bad for the UK. I just wanted someone in the European Union to kick Brussels to the stage where you might get either movement away from the stupid rules of the Maastricht Treaty and the so-called, let's give it its proper name, it's the Growth and Stability Pact, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Okay, well, it's been stagnation and instability. That's what the real impact has been. So I saw the Brexit voters as a convenient, mild way for one member of the European Union to protest to Brussels and hopefully get some movement out of Brussels. And what you got instead was complete intransigence. And this actually came up in a discussion I had with Jeff Hodgson on Twitter a couple of days ago. And my reply was that the Tories were trying to leave the Hotel California, which is the point that Yanis Varoufakis made. I think when did he run? Yanis wrote an article to Theresa May, remember her? On 3rd of May 2017 in The Guardian, saying that you simply can't negotiate with Brussels. They will give you the Brussels runaround. You'll go for one person, you shuffle from one person to another and never get a decision. It'll go on for years and years and years until they wear you out. The only way to proceed is to give them a flat, this is our position, Norway plus, no negotiation, and just you play hardball, you don't move, and you force them into that situation over time. But in fact, I
think that's what they're trying to do right now, isn't it?
Too late. There's nothing they've actually done. I mean, to imagine this. When did the vote occur? I mean, I've lost track. Was it 2015?
2016.
2016, yeah, June 2016. And they tried to negotiate an agreement, and as he said, they would be told, "This, I don't have responsibility." They'd go and talk to so-and-so down the corridor, and on you go around the loop, and you get back to the first person you saw.
And here we are, 4.5 years later, almost 4.5 years later, and we've got a couple of months to go, and still it seems we've got nowhere.
Completely nowhere.
But I think your hope was as well, out of Brexit, was that if Britain pulled out, then others might pull out too, and the whole thing might fall apart. And yet,
that hasn't.
No, in fact, it seems to have been, people seem to have bedded down more. And in fact, there's more talk now about whether, in fact, being within the EU should be even more centralised. Part of that talk is about, well, maybe we also ought to start introducing taxation. So, do we get over that half-pregnant cow situation by becoming a completely pregnant cow and take away even more sovereignty out of the nations that are left within it?
Well, I mean,
you've either got to do that or not do it.
Yeah, I mean, they're sitting at the not doing it stage until COVID came along, and now what's happening with COVID in Europe is an absolute tragedy. The numbers, what is it, about 10 times the number of cases now that we're back in March, and the summer of apparently reducing COVID is well and truly over. So in that situation, there is a need for coordinated policies, not just at the national level, but the continental level, and maybe that might finally kick the European Union into becoming what it's always wanted to be, which is the United States of Europe. That was the reason.
Well, I mean, we've spoken about this because there was the hope that they had actually agreed a package, but they seem to be having difficulty agreeing how it's going to be spent. I'm not sure that money's funding.
The larger you make something, then the more stakeholders you have in any action, the harder it is to reach a decision. And this was the fact that when you actually want to get a change through the European Union with the existing structure, you not only have to get the European Parliament to vote in favour of it, you've got to get the 19 finance ministers as well. One of whom used to be Yanis Varoufakis, of course. The one thing I want to quote from Yanis, which I think was absolutely wonderful here. He said he'd go through and do all this detailed work, serious econometric and sound economic analysis. Once they'd been tested with some of the highest authorities in the field, I would take them to Greece's creditors in Brussels, Berlin and Frankfurt. Then I would sit back and observe a symphony of blank stares. It was as if I had not spoken, as if there was no document. The responses when they came would be perfectly independent of anything I had said, and I love his choice here. I might as well have been singing the Swedish national anthem. It would have made no difference. Now, that's the intransigence that the British have run into. If we had goodwill on either side of this, to some degree, accepting the British had made a decision, and then how do we help them implement, this could have been decided in 1 or 2 years. Max. Yeah. Instead, it's 3.5, 4 going on 4 years later. It still hasn't, nothing has happened. And you look at it and think, holy shit, do we need this at the same time as coping with the virus? No.
Well, that was my point. I mean, this is a bad time to leave, isn't it? Particularly if we leave without a deal.
I would put everything on hold. I mean, the first, second, third, fourth and 73rd business of government should be defeating COVID.
Yeah. And in the meantime, the UK economy, which is not looking great, livelihoods which are struggling, which would struggle even more by the imposition of tariffs. I mean, and then the dangers of not getting the food supplies because of all the paperwork that's required. I mean, a huge amount of food that we eat in the UK comes from the Netherlands. This could be an absolute disaster looming, couldn't it, at the end of this year?
It could be. I mean, if you find that you can't ship the food from the world's second largest food exporter to one of the world's largest food importers because of the change in the paperwork, and you have a period where not only don't you have essential services, but you don't even have food being delivered, yes, it could be a disaster. I still think that the sheer panic of that will force some immediate compromises, and it'll be a case of ship now and do the paperwork later. But it's still potentially catastrophic addition to a situation which is already being badly mangled by the British authorities as it is.
Yeah. Look, we're told that the two sticking points are fish, and that is just a crazy situation. We'll come on to that in just a second. But the other one is state aid. And this, I mean, the more you delve into this, the more you realise, this is just complicated. It's never going to get sorted out. So, for example, as it currently stands, with the UK having been a member of the EU, this is the way it works for EU members. You can't give any state aid to any company unless it's less than 200,000 euros over a 3-year period. Of course, you can get around that. If you want to give €1 million to a company, you just get the company to split into 5 is the easy way around that. But you also, you can give state aid if it promotes disadvantaged areas or small and medium-sized businesses, or it's there for research and development, for environmental protection, training, employment, or culture. So I would have thought Britain could live with that because, it's. I guess the issue is having to justify any expenditure to the EU when you've left it. That's the big problem. But so long as R&D is there, because the two things you'd want to give state aid for. One is going to be for infrastructure, for example, like public transport and the like, and the other one is going to be research and development to try and help new industries.
But it's just a quick question here: is this the sort of stuff the European Union rules which could be used to override legislation to provide finances for companies which are failing because of COVID?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a really good question, isn't it? Because they would almost certainly be going against their own rules right now.
Yeah.
That's right.
The desire to maintain a neoclassical vision of competitiveness means we might die of a virus, or not die of a virus, but go bankrupt because we've lost the cash flow that's been wiped out by the virus in the first place. So this is the extent to which the European Union has been the neo-ordoliberal regime trying to impose mainstream economic thinking on the entire continent of Europe in the belief that'll make the economy work better. And Wynne Godley, this is one reason why I'm so anti the European Union and the euro all the way through. As Wynne Godley said back in 1992 in Maastricht and all that, when a crisis hits, the rules of the European Union will require the government to take money out of the economy when its money's already collapsed because of the private sector's problems, and it will turn what could be an ordinary recession into a serious depression. Now, if those rules strike now, then heaven help us. That's a reason to continue with Brexit and say, take your bloody rules. But then you've got the dilemma of, well, how if you have escaped those rules, how do you manage to import the food you need from the Netherlands?
But the other thing as well is if you, even in normal times, whenever they are, if you want state aid, you'd want state aid to help. We've talked about, how Japan got its competitive position because it had a fairly closed economy, and it was supporting investment in new ideas and new technologies, which gave them a head start on the rest of the world. Surely, there's a good case study there that you'd want to follow. But if you take the official text, Article 92 of the Treaty of Rome, God, there's so much information in these podcasts. And the quote is, they forbid any subsidy that distorts or threatens to distort competition by favouring certain undertakings or the production of certain goods. So that would mean, the way I'm reading that, if you do research and development into new goods, into a disruptive technology that is going to distort the sale of old goods that they're replacing, then you wouldn't be able to do that because you would be undertaking to upset the production of those goods.
I've got a feeling you've swapped sides on Brexit.
A little bit.
Because you're being plenty of good arguments for Brexit now, and you're normal. So I've
always thought it's a nonsense. My point was, as long as it exists, we don't want to have. I can see the point for free trade without tariffs. But the more I look into it, we know that it's an administrative nightmare, and once you're out of it, if we have a level playing field and we're having to follow these regulations, then we know that there will just be court proceeding. The winners out of all of this are going to be the lawyers.
The lawyers. So to me, at the moment, the last thing. If you actually got to the point where there were lawsuits coming out of the European Union against Britain for some of its measures to reduce the damage of COVID, then I think that'd be a reason to say let's damn well do it and bugger the consequences. I don't think that's going to happen. Everybody's going to be, obviously in Europe and the mainland of Europe, completely dominated by COVID, just like everybody should be in the UK as well. But having said that, you just don't want the extra chaos of Brexit in the middle of the chaos of COVID. So I think it's a reason to delay rather than go through the whole thing and say, just put it on the sidelines. It's nobody needs to worry about this crisis. This administrative issue while we're facing on the biological one of COVID.
Yeah, but even so, it is an administrative nightmare to try and get a free trade agreement where you're going to have tariff-free trade when we are so close to Europe, so long as you've got that question about subsidies and also public procurement, which I want to talk about as well. But it just raises the question. Free trade agreements aren't anything but free. They are complicated, aren't they?
And again, we've drifted from Brexit to free trade, but nonetheless, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's at the core of it all, though. We're trying to get a free trade agreement. Yeah,
you're trying to minimise the tariffs, but the tariffs are already, compared to what they were 30 years ago, they're trivial anyway. There's only a few industries where tariffs are greater than 10%. Most of them are in international trade are quite low these days. So the neoclassical agenda of eliminating trade barriers has been politically successful. And this is just an attempt to stay within that overall milieu of free trade overalls that characterises the globalised economy. When we're seeing the globalised economy going backwards, courtesy of COVID, because you don't want to have we want to have short supply chains. You don't want to be dependent on countries which suddenly can't export, which can't produce the goods in the first place. You want to produce stuff which is much less complicated, close to home, such as, for example, Britain producing its own food as much as it can do it. But if the Netherlands can grow, the world's second largest exporters, why can't Britain use some of the same technology? Going localized is what matters now. Rather than this obsession with free trade.
And yet Britain is almost certainly going to do more trade with the United States rather than dealing with Europe. And that just seems like a nonsense. But then you get into the other argument, other than the level playing field, is fish. Mm-hmm. And this is just bizarre. So fishing accounts for 0.1% of the UK economy, 12,000 jobs. A lot of those jobs are seasonal workers from the EU. About 300,000 tonnes of the 700,000 tonnes landed by UK fishing vessels are fished abroad, so getting on for half. So the UK will lose half the fishing waters that it fishes within Europe at the moment. And when that eventually gets landed in UK ports, most of it, more than half, finds its way being exported to Europe. So... I mean, it makes no sense. And of the money that is earned within the UK, the large majority of it goes to four of the wealthiest families in the UK. So, so you've got wealthy families employing EU workers to ship foreign waters to fish for fish that's going to be exported back to the EU. But we're hanging on to it because it's a really important issue, even though it's 0.1% of the economy. That's a nonsense, isn't it?
Oh, God almighty. I mean...
But the thing is, the problem is, Steve, the fish don't respect the borders. That's the problem.
The bastards. Yeah. They swim through them all the damn time. Yeah.
But this has become so you look at things like that and you think, well, my God, you're never going to get an agreement that everyone's going to be very happy with. Macron has got to satisfy the fishing industry within France that they're still going to get access to British waters. And it's not going to happen. So for this tiny proportion of the economy, are we ever going to get to a free trade deal?
This is why I say just throw the damn thing in the heap of papers in the corner of the room and focus on COVID and do whatever's necessary. Forget about any of the rules written down in any of the treaties. What's going to help you succeed in suppressing the disease and reducing the damage both to people's health and the economy.
So just extend the transition period for another couple of years.
We don't. You need this like a hole in the head right now. Okay, you need to have bureaucrats worrying about this sort of stuff. No way. I mean, anybody should be worrying about it. Put the damn thing off. At least to get one positive out of COVID of delaying the nonsense, and maybe in the meantime they'll finish building that trolley park. Where's the lorry park being?
Kent is going to be a lorry park. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well,
nice towns.
At least they might finish the damn thing. At least that'll be some construction work. But yeah, to me, it's been a disaster all the way through. Of course, remember when it began, I thought I was doing a protest vote, by the way. When I voted for Brexit, I thought I was going to be a protest vote and the majority would vote to stay. Cameron, of course, called the referendum because he thought it would lose. And of course, who lost? He was the one who lost. He and Osborne were out the next day and Theresa May took over. Well, that was great. It has been such a shambles all the way through.
But I mean, I wonder whether, aside from the nonsense or the litigation that exists within the EU, Britain is going to face many of the same problems trying to get a free trade agreement with the US, isn't it? Where you're going to hit the same rules in terms of subsidies to industries. And then the other big one, which will certainly apply within the US and maybe in pharmaceuticals, is going to be in procurement. So let me give you an example. The EU is drawing up an agreement with Indonesia. Part of that is it wants Indonesia to open up to its procurement, its public procurement. They say 10 to 25% of GDP of national economies is government spending. It's 19% of the EU's GDP. and in emerging markets it's higher. And the EU is a supporter of an ambitious opening of international public procurement markets. They say experience has shown that an opening of these markets can improve the government's ability to get better value for money by gaining access to a richer and more diverse pool of goods and services and increasing the efficient use of public resources. So, in other words, they want Indonesia to
open up its market to British goods.
Yeah.
American goods.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going to apply everywhere, isn't it? So that's going to be the same. And yet, where do you draw the line on that? And this is another area of enormous litigation, isn't it? Because if you have somebody who's breached those rules, it's going to go to court. I'm not quite sure which court, but you're going to have that. You're going to have that problem. This government didn't open up this to tender fully, or it put in measures that's going to make it difficult for foreign companies to tender. And we see that all the time.
Yeah, and you've also got I've forgotten this particular, again, at the tribunal where the companies can complain against government rules that they say discriminate against them, and 90% of the time the court rules in favour of the companies. So you get companies controlling government legislation. And this whole thing is massively anti-democratic, massively against letting countries shape their own futures. Of course, they've done a pretty damn bad job of doing that, but the companies, Philip Morris was able to sue, I think it was Indonesia, for constraints on smoking. So you get this ludicrous situation where we know what should be done in health terms, and the free trade rules undermine it. So to me, this is just it's far enough. This is a clusterfuck. The whole thing, because it presumes a world in which all this stuff works effectively, and you get a greater rate of economic growth out of it, and the losers are compensated by the winners, and nobody complains. But the whole vision of free trade, and we should have yet another talk on this one, I think, is historically and theoretically false, because the countries that have grown most successfully are the ones that have restricted foreign competition.
Yeah, and we've talked about that,
including the UK.
Yeah, because they have a more diverse economy as a result of it, and they're not buying in.
Diversification matters more than trade.
Yeah.
And having a broad industrial base and promoting your own industries gives you economies of scale, which lets them grow over time. That's the one argument in favour of a large, and I think like the European Union, the scale of the economy is such to enable economies of scale to occur that couldn't occur at a national level, and that was a solid reason for building up that one trading bloc. But the idea that abolishing tariff barriers everywhere makes the world more efficient, it's another neoclassical fantasy about allocating what you have now being more important than developing what you have over time. And that's just wrong. The countries that have done best are the ones that have focused on industrial development. And that's why, rather than, if Japan had focused on its comparative advantage, we'd be talking about the wondrous Japanese exports of silk. Which is what it was specialised in back in those days. It's the building a diverse industrial structure. That's what gave them that success. Yeah. And that's, you're looking at a mess compared to what people would thought would be a work of art.
Well, if you were negotiating with the EU right now and you were hitting an obstacle on this idea that we need a level playing field, then the UK government would be very well placed, I would have thought, to say, well, okay, let's look at public procurement, because our utilities are all privately owned, and if a company in Europe wants to pitch to run them, then that's fine, because a lot of them are owned by foreign companies anyway. A lot of them are already owned by European companies, in fact. So on that basis, we think water, electricity, gas in the Netherlands, all publicly owned. We think they should cease to be publicly owned. Trains in Germany, mostly publicly owned. Same in France. Banking and insurance in Germany are very often publicly owned, and water as well. Greek government has got Wi-Fi in public spaces. We don't think they should be doing that. Ireland, the rail, buses, water, all publicly owned. I mean, we should be saying, well, if it's going to be a level playing field, all of those have got to be out to tender. We'd like British companies to try and run some of these. Easy negotiation.
You actually have joined the Brexit side, haven't you? I thought you...
Well, it's an enormous opportunity I'm seeing now, in fact, for British companies to run most of Europe.
Yeah. Well, it's an opportunity to waste people's time on trivia based on fallacious theories of economics, when we need to really be focusing upon by the biological issue of COVID and our health, and just put this stuff on the damn side table for a while, and let's, again, as we know.
But what's the end? I mean, if there was a quick result, what would you say? I mean, it wouldn't be the right time now for no deal because of all the tariffs, etc., that would have to sorting all of that out. But do you think if say COVID was just a thing of the past in a year's time, and we could get back to Brexit, what do you think? We should just be saying yes, no deal
The thing I always thought should happen is that you simply you leave the European Union, but you remain part of the European trading bloc.
Right.
And you accept any because you've got to have all the industrial standards. You accept the European Union's industrial standards, and they have a reciprocal arrangement with yours, something of that nature, to a minimal level of interference, because the basic idea of having a large supranational economy, where economies of scale could be exploited by any corporation across the whole continent, that made sense.
But they're not going to accept that for those two reasons: the level playing field in terms of government subsidies and open procurement.
And that's what I want to see change. That's why I supported Brexit, to get out of this quagmire of ludicrously complicated rules that were supposed to be building a neoclassical textbook vision of the economy, but were in fact tying up national governments in knots and being exploited by large corporations. Because again, a major thing with trade deals, particularly the United States, is you've got to open up your patent laws to their preferred patent systems. In some cases, they have patents lasting 75 years. So the free trade deal means accepting the American definition of patents lasting forever, which used to be based on what was called the Mickey Mouse Clause, because literally every time Walt Disney was about to lose copyright on Mickey Mouse, they'd extend the terms for another 7 years. And that's how we got to 75 years when it started at 21 years for copyright. So far from freeing up trade, you had it being used by corporations that already had cornered a market to be able to continue cornering that market. And by the way, the number of Mickey Mouse products, quite literally, that I see in Thailand is breathtaking.
Yeah, God knows why. It's a bygone era, but
it's a big one over here. So but free trade has actually ended up being a way of enabling large corporations to hang on to their patent rights, and that wasn't exactly what even the textbook writers had in mind when they were talking about the wonders of free trade. They didn't even think about the issues like patents.
Okay, finally then, so we agree that Brexit is it is not the time to be trying to reach an agreement. I mean, it's just a nightmare scenario for the UK right now.
This is not the time to talk about Brexit.
But we've been talking about it for half an hour.
Which we haven't done, by the way.
Well, we talked around it. Look, a byproduct could be Scottish independence, particularly if they do push ahead with it. 55% voted against it in 2014, but the majority are now in favour of it in Scotland. There's a poll in the Scottish Herald. It's a newspaper poll, so obviously it's biased depending on their readership, but 86% reckons that they will be independent by 2026. We had Ian Blackford saying on TV, Scottish National Party MP, their leader in Westminster, saying on TV the other week that he believes they're going to have their own currency. Then, when they leave, they are not going to be tied to the euro. They're going to have their own independent Scottish pound. And I was thinking, well, they're too small for that. And, what do they export? So let me give you a couple of figures on this, because I thought, well, maybe they've got a chance on this. Scottish exports in 2018, according to gov.scot, £85 billion. That's including, of course, exporting to the rest of the UK. That's about 16,000 per person. New Zealand exports, as an example of another small country, are about 6,500 per person. So Scotland has a bigger population, so much bigger exports coming out of Scotland than New Zealand. The biggest category for Scotland is food and beverage, 6.3 billion versus 4 billion for coke and petroleum. So even though we think, they're getting North Sea oil, 3.4 billion in professional, scientific and technical activity. So maybe, it's a big enough economy to go on its own. There's certainly much smaller economies within the EU, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason they joined the EU, to cause it themselves in a larger economy. But yeah, that's Luxembourg's the joke. That's 300,000 people. But you do have, like I think Belgium is about 10 million people. So yes, it's feasible to imagine the economy being viable on its own, and by having its own currency, it can devalue, in a market-driven sense, when it has trade deficits. So it would be feasible. I didn't realise that. I thought oil was such a large part that it would be, when oil has to cease happening, I thought that would be a serious crisis. But that's actually less than its food exports.
Whiskey and stuff like that. Yeah. And so they perhaps can land on their feet from all of this, and that would be an interesting. I mean, it's breaking up the union of the UK, but because of that ability to devalue their currency, I mean, it could see businesses head north of the border, couldn't it? I mean, it could be a great thing for Scotland.
We went from Brexit to Scotland.
Yeah, but that's because it is a consequence of it. Look, if we don't have a free trade agreement and we leave and there's tariffs imposed, Scotland will then push ahead with their independence and they'll get support for it, just as sure as night follows day. Just you watch.
Well, I think at the moment, night should be postponed for a year till we get out of the COVID hassle.
I think that's certainly the case. All right, we'll leave it there for now. Good to talk, Steve. Catch you again very soon.
Okay, mate. Bye.
Tell you, if you look into the EU regulations on subsidies and public procurement, you're going to ask, why will they let Britain leave without adhering to all of those? Of course they won't. And that's why, an oven-baked deal was never going to happen. Now, look, maybe next time we should talk about America, given all that's going on this week. We'll give it a few days to see how it all settles down, whether Donald Trump is eventually sectioned or if he's put on suicide watch. But what will a Biden-led US mean to the rest of the world? We'll talk about that next week, I think, on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for listening today.